Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are, whenever you are. Welcome back to Two Marine Dads podcast, episode number 20.
20. We've done 20 of these, dude. It's awesome.
Stacking them up. Today we're going to get into the social justice battle. We're going to talk about social justice warriors, obviously, BLM, and a lot of these movements that are moving around the country through our schools, universities. By schools, I mean like lower education, schools, universities, workplaces, government, the whole nine yards.
Yep.
And talk about how they are linked, not necessarily directly or by a common leader, but by a common destination, whether they want to or not. And one of the first cases that we came across in recent news is this case with Grace School Church and Paul Rossi, a teacher who was fired or put on leave. I don't know if he was fired yet, but he's not teaching in classes.
He's been relieved of his teaching duties.
He's not teaching anymore. But because he spoke out against, near as John and I can tell, looks like probably critical race theory.
Yeah.
Or some variation of it there, being forced upon students at the school.
Right. It's not listed specifically. It just says anti-racism education or indoctrination.
And what they're doing is they're demonizing people for being white. And, you know, Paul has this conversation recorded that FAIR helped release, which FAIR is the Foundation Against Injustice and Racism, right? They tweeted out these audio recordings of the school basically acknowledging that, oh yeah, we're demonizing children just for being white and, you know, for nothing more than that. And going through the conversations and listening to what has been released to the media, essentially, between Paul Rossi and the head of the Grace School Church, Davidson, it sounds like Davidson doesn't even support the stuff that's being gone. There's this third party somewhere in this whole situation that is pushing this idea of, you know, attacking people because they're just white and whiteness and using that terminology to make people feel bad for something that is an innate character and nothing they have control over. Just the fact that they were born white means that they've got some kind of inherent evil. That's what this critical race theory bullshit all centers around.
Right.
And pushes.
They never actually name it. They just say they or them this entire time. And they spell it out, how they're being attacked, how they're, quote, being gutted. And we'll put the audio in here, guys, so you guys can hear the whole conversation. But FAIR, the Foundation Against Intolerance and Racism, they actually released all the audio after the school came out and said it was bunk or it was misleading. But yeah, this guy, George Davidson, comes out and basically spells it out. He's the head of the school. He comes out and says, hey, guys, you know, we are using verbiage that makes white students feel lesser. Those are his words. And of course, you know, Rossi calls him out for it and says, thank you very much for actually admitting it. But they go into it to talk about this other institution. And they don't necessarily spell it out, but this other indoctrination, this idea that of critical race theory is what we believe it is going to gut them. And they're just a stone in the way of the progress of this revolution. And, Rossi calls out George Davison at one point and says, George David. That's it. Yeah, Davison calls him out and says, hey, you know, you don't even know there's a revolution that's happening and it's occurring. Like it's happening around you and you have no idea. You can't stop it. Because at one point George comes back and says, hey, I want to recenter this whole thing. Like, no, dude, it's too late. You've let the barn door open. You've allowed, you know, they're in the barn. Is how he phrased it.
I think he was trying to make an analogy to the fox in the hen house kind of deal, but
it's too late.
And this school isn't the only place we're seeing this. You know, you're seeing schools in like California basically getting to the point where they're saying math is racist and objective reality is racist. You have the school district in Virginia. I say the school district, the Virginia School Board, if you will, is going to remove AP classes, if you will, advanced classes for math for anybody under grade 11. So it doesn't matter if you're, you know, the next Einstein and you're in the 6th grade, you're taking the same math class regardless as the kid who hates math, can barely add 2 and 2 together. And not that I'm trying to make fun of the other kid, but there's no reason those two kids should be in the same class. And the whole basis for that movement is racial equality, because they see that, their ideas, and since we can't pick up everybody, we're going to hold everybody back to the lowest common denominator, so everybody feels the same.
Well, it's not, not to correct you, but it's not equality, it's equity. And those two things, we talked about that on a previous podcast. Like, it is, those two words are totally different. They're doing it in the name of equity. They don't want anybody to feel left out. But ask yourself, why are we sacrificing our A students so everybody can become a C student? Why are we doing that? And it's in the name of equity, or the outcome, everybody passing. Not some people go on to become A students and some are D students. Why not have the guy who's good at art go to art class and the guy who's good at math go to, advanced math? We're make everybody the same, under the guise of making everybody equal, not treating everybody equal.
Equal outcome rather than equal opportunity.
Right. And then like you had touched on it, talking about how math, in California, they're basically saying that math is racist because there's a correct answer and an incorrect answer. Is a form of white supremacy infiltrating the classrooms. So these people go on to talk about how if there's always a right answer and a wrong answer, you're perpetuating objectivity as well as a fear of open conflict. So you're saying, hey, if you come out and say, hey, I got the wrong answer, you're afraid to say I got the wrong answer, and therefore it's racist because it's inequitable for Black, Latinx, multilingual students, and we should join communities of practice, whatever that means. So I had to Google what community of practices was. And here's the ironic part about this whole thing. Communities of practice is the term designated to describe groups of people who share a concern and they come together to learn something. And this could be a tribe in the middle of the jungle where they come together and try to figure out how to survive with one another. This could be a group of engineers that are in a classroom together that want to send a rocket to Mars. This could be a group of math students together trying to learn how to do a quadratic equation or how to solve for simple, learn fractions at a lower level or something. So here you have the Oregon Department of Educators in this case saying that this new math, that there's not a right and a wrong answer, will help improve equitable outcomes for Blacks, Latinx, multilingual students, and join communities of practice. So you take these individuals, the Blacks, the Latinx, the multilingual students, and you separate them into individual groups, and then you say, we need to join communities of practice, which in and of itself is a community. So there's the irony there of breaking everybody out and then saying everybody should come together to learn how to do math. It's called a math class, and everybody sits down and listens to the teacher teach math as one, and they come together and ask questions together as a community in that classroom, regardless of what they flipping look like. So the irony here where you've come full circle by being so anti-racist, you're actually racist now,
Yeah, and it's stuff we've touched on in the past with, separate graduation ceremonies and stuff like that, but it's this idea that was a long time ago and a lot of us laughed about because it didn't seem like it was too harmful and it was something to make fun of. But this idea of trophies for everybody, there's no losers, they where they don't keep scores at soccer games or little kid peewee football games, and all this kind of stuff doesn't help people develop. It prevents them from developing, coping skills and the ability to deal with strife and hardship in their lives. And since all of these kids are now being taught that, there is no right and wrong answer. There's your truth. There's this truth. And that truth doesn't matter because it's from a white person. If you're a minority, this is some of the things that are being told and being perpetuated. And there's two classes of people that kind of fall into this that are doing these things. And in my mind, it's kind of this whole idea of useful idiots, if you will, right? So you've got a group of people that think they're doing good. They think they're helping. They think they're adding to society. But in reality, all they're doing is they are pushing along an ideology and an agenda that they have no idea. You know, a lot of people want racial equality because they think there's racial inequality. They've been lied to and told that there is this idea that just because you're white, you have a lot easier life than somebody who's black. And that's it. That's it, period. And takes into no consideration for the fact that there are people that are very successful that are black and people that are very unsuccessful that are white. Right. And it puts bad outcomes based on nothing other than the color of your skin, not your choices that you've made in life, not the people you're around, not the locations you're in. It's just because you're black or it's just because you're white. That's how come you got the outcome you had. And this is that whole equitable versus equal idea. And you hear it. I mean, you hear politicians talk about it. They want equitable laws when it comes to taxes, or they want equitable, handouts when it comes to bailouts. And when anybody uses the word equitable, it should make the hair on the back of your neck stand up.
Yeah. Yeah, you should run and hide because they're talking about taking something from you and giving it to somebody else, not allowing somebody else to have the same opportunity.
Or keeping you from being able to achieve something.
Correct.
Just because somebody else can't.
Right. There's a difference between treating everybody equal and making everybody equal. What was it? Martin Luther King who said, I had a dream that my 4 little boys or whatever will be judged by the
content of their character,
not be judged by the color of their skin, but by the content of the character.
Mm-hmm.
So, and that's what we're talking about here, guys. I mean, you got a guy like Bernie Madoff, I guess, he just passed away here, but, he was richy rich and he ended up in prison, but somebody like Ben Carson can go from HUD housing in the inner city to being, HUD housing director for the president of the United States all in the same lifetime, become a neurosurgeon. So how does one guy who's black start at the bottom and work his way all the way up to the tippy top of the A list, if you will, and somebody else who obviously had a silver spoon in his mouth, had everything going for him, the white skin and all that, end up in prison braiding his cellmate's cornrows? Again, your skin tone has absolutely nothing to do with it. And it's everything with the content of your character. If you put in the work, you will get the reward. And they're trying to change that. They're trying to take that away.
And it's this, all of this isn't just because people want to battle racism. That's not what this is centered around. The people that are leading these protests, that are leading these organizations, for the most part are Marxists in some form or another, whether openly or not. But their goal at the end of the day is for radical change within our society and our government. And they understand that people won't do this willingly. People don't like change. I mean, you can talk about being open-minded and stuff. That's not what I'm talking about. When it comes to societal change, that stuff happens slowly, and it happens slowly for a reason, because when it happens quickly, that's when societies collapse. Quick revolution was the French Revolution. Quick revolution was the Bolshevik revolution. Those are quick revolutions. Those are not the kind of revolutions you want. You want slow, steady change that everybody adjusts to and is accustomed to.
Right. I mean, and of course, societal norms change with the times, but you got to be careful when someone says a sentence like, the sentence, Black Lives Matter. Well, I don't think there's a person on this planet who would disagree with that. Of course, Black Lives Matter, right? I mean, but then when you look at the organization and you realize it's being run by Marxists, notably Marxist. And Tyler and I, before this podcast, were going over that, what the difference. I was like, Karl Marx, he wrote the book on socialism. But no, socialism is a form of government and Marxism is an ideology, and this is like a cancer that's within socialism, if you want to call it that. And these guys want to systematically dismantle the United States and make everybody the same. At the same time, their founders go out and buy a $1.4 million house in a ritzy neighborhood in LA.
And that's what communism, right, and any kind of authoritarianism, which communism is, ends up always being in that shape where they attack capitalism and capitalist pigs this and capitalist pigs that. But at the end of the day, the people that are in charge of the communist system live like royalty. Right. No different than a monarchy or any other kind of system along those lines. And that's Marxist goal. Marxists may spout socialist ideologies and push for socialist systems, but at the end of the day, their end goal is communism. They want to force people, whether they see them because people are too stupid to take care of themselves, so they need some massive state planner to make sure that their lives go the way they're supposed to go, and everybody serves the real big goal of what they're and reaches their maximum utility, if you will. The problem is that what you see your utility at and what the government see your utility at are usually two different things.
Yep.
And they don't give a shit what you want to do. There's a slot to fill. You're going to go do it.
Yep.
You know, it was kind of like in the Marine Corps where if you got 3 picks for a job, and if you didn't get any of those 3, it went to the needs of the Marine Corps,
right.
Which meant wherever they needed somebody, that's where you went, regardless of your aptitude or whatever you did.
Right.
And so that's what the leaders of BLM are. They're open about it. They've discussed it. They're proud of it. They're proud Marxists. And their movement is nothing more than a method of revolution to change things. I don't know that they actually believe most of what they say. It doesn't matter whether they do or they don't. Because what they're going after, they're being disingenuous about and dishonest. They're not revealing their full plans about where they want to go with things, not openly. You can look through the details and figure out where they're headed, you know, especially when you look at what their teachings and the way they approach things.
They have a handbook. Yeah.
But the BLM isn't the only ones out there. You know, you have Saul Alinsky's Rules for Radicals. It's the same process. All of this stuff has changed from the inside, and it's a long game. Yeah. And they depend on the fact that many people don't think much beyond, 6, 8, 10, 12 months down the road.
Rudy Duchek. Am I saying that right?
Dusky. Rudy
Dosky. Sorry, my German's not good. Rudy Dosky said, he called it the long march through the institutions. And what that means is not just necessarily your colleges and your grade schools and your high schools or whatever, but everything, your professions, everything from the top down, police, fire, the whole bit. So, and that's kind of what you're touching on here, man, is that long, slow change from one to the other. And there is a revolution happening. If you don't think a guy in Texas holed up in a parking garage with a high-powered rifle taking out just the white cops, isn't part of a revolution while marchers walk by talking about, pigs in a blanket, fire them like bacon, and then you fast forward, 3 years? That was about 3-4 years ago when that happened. You fast forward till now and you've got Maxine Waters leaves her state, flies 2 time zones away to chime in on the Derek Chauvin, yeah,
the trial,
his trial,
George Floyd,
for the George Floyd, yeah, and she's talking to these people out there. She's like, if we don't get a murder 1 conviction, then we need to ratchet up and be more confrontational, and it's embraced. Everyone's like, yeah, that's perfectly fine. Yeah, you're not jury tampering, you're not trying to incite violence, but this woman may have given that idiot an out to be retried. And what happens when the next jury doesn't find him guilty? Then what? You know what I mean? So like the whole thing, she just needed to stay out of it and keep her mouth shut, but she's absolutely inciting violence, and everybody on the left is cool with it. No one's condemning her for it.
Well, it's this whole method. It's this whole idea of not having principles, and it's getting cool to not have principles. I feel like if you don't have principles, it's some kind of statement of virtue that you're able to bend like Gumby to meet the end goal of whatever you're after. For example, this young woman who was shot in Columbus the other day. When it first came out, it was just basically, you saw the article, white cop shoots teenage girl, and you're like, oh, well, Christ. Or yeah, black teenage girl. And you're like, oh God, here we go again. Now what comes of this? And basically BLM was riding outside the police station to get the body cam footage released. And then they released the body cam footage, and it shows that the cop basically saved somebody's life because she was in the process of getting ready to murder somebody with a knife, and the cop shot her and killed her. And it's sad, that an individual had to lose their life, but the cop was faced with this choice of doing something or doing nothing. And it didn't matter what he did. He would have been attacked. If anybody tells you this isn't the case, they're lying to themselves, or again, they've got an agenda. If the cop hadn't shot, the story would have been cop refuses to save black girl.
Right.
And then he did shot. Now the story is cop murders. And the worst part about this is you have people like Valerie Jarrett, who was the senior advisor to the Obama administration. And I'm not big on movie stars because I think they're idiots, and the women on The View are just dumb as a box of rocks. But all of these
Except
people that have
McCain's cool.
a lot of there's a lot of people that have a lot of reach and a lot of social impact that are talking about how the cops should have just let them fight it out, and knife fights are normal.
LeBron James tweeting, "You're next to the cop." He's got 5 million followers, and then and no one, with the exception of the people on the right, are condemning that. They're all like, "Oh, well, it's just LeBron." Like, dude, you just incited 5 million people. Yeah, no one's running from him.
No advertisers. I mean, it's Gatorade, Nike, everybody's still behind him.
But Georgia passes a law that increases voting hours, and people start boycotting that state. It's so backwards right now.
And the Georgia thing's real scary because this shows you how the wokeness, if you will, the social justice has corrupted into the corporate world. Right. Delta doesn't give two shits about the Georgia voting law. I don't think. But what they do care about is bad press. And they feel like if they make these sacrifices to the woke culture, the BLM movements and things like that they'll be left alone. And what they don't realize is it's just like giving a mouse a cookie. Next, he's going to ask for milk. And then he's going to want a napkin and then a place to stay. And Delta, Coca-Cola, the baseball, all these organizations that don't have pristine records on race themselves all of a sudden are trying to virtue signal like, oh my gosh, this thing in Georgia is awful. But in reality, the law in Georgia, there's nothing wrong with it.
No, it actually benefited black
people. You have the political system that it all centers around ID for voting, right? At the end of the day, the leftists don't want IDs at the voting booth because they want to be able to affect elections. They want to be able to ballot harvest. They want to be able to do all sorts of shit that IDs won't let them do anymore. And it's not necessarily that it's election tampering or fraud. It's in a legal sense. I mean, there is illegal stuff going on, but it's the legal stuff that they can get away with that they do right now, that like the ballot farming and all that other shit that they do, and they want to keep it that way. And if they go to voter IDs, they can't. That's the only reason. And the idea that this idea that people can't get an ID to vote in this day and age is such a load of shit. Because you can't do anything in the existing world today without an ID. I mean, the same people...
You can't buy a cell phone without an ID.
The same people that are telling you that it's racist to ask an ID to vote are the same people that tell you we need to have a fucking vaccination card.
Right.
To prove that you've been vaccinated. So...
Give me your papers.
They want you to have an ID to buy a gun. They want you to have an ID to drive. They want IDs for all sorts of shit. But as soon as it comes to voting, which arguably affects more people than guns do,
right?
No ID. No need to prove who you are. No need to guarantee that there's not somebody voting twice or somebody voting in the name of somebody else, which there's proof that happens.
Oh, yeah.
And it's for nothing more than controlling power. That's all it's about. This gets into the what this whole movement and what all these people are doing, what the real goal of this is. And it's just power and control. They want to be able to tell you what you have to do. They want to be able to tell you that, you do it our way or you don't do anything.
Right. So I find it ironic that the same companies that chastise the Georgia voting law don't have necessarily the most stellar record on race to begin with. Like I said earlier in the podcast, societal norms change with the times, so as things progress, your opinions of what's okay and what's not okay progress, but if you really want to look at it, and they want to, Coca-Cola wants to boycott the state of Georgia. Well, hell, they were founded in Atlanta, Georgia by a Confederate State Army veteran by the name of John S. Pemberton. Like, well, why don't you just change your name? Why don't you up and root? Why don't you go up north and live, found yourself in New York or something? You sat there in the Jim Crow era South until 1964, and didn't have a problem. Should we judge you based off of what you've done in the past? You seem ready to judge everybody else for what they've done in the past. Same thing with the MLB, 1869 is when the MLB got started. And, shoot, they didn't have a first black player until 78 years later, but you're going to lecture us on what equality should look like and voter rights and voter suppression and racism? Are you joking? You know, like, should we judge you based off of your past, 78 years without having a person of color in your league? What's the matter with you? You know, same thing. I mean, there's the litany goes on and on. Delta, they didn't get their first black pilot until 1968. A guy named Sam Grady, 43 years after their founding. UPS, was founded in Washington, Seattle. They didn't get their first their black driver. Actually, they beat everybody else till 1957. A guy named Ken Jarvis, and that guy opened the door and paved the way for thousands of people of color. So I mean, like, you can't. I find it really difficult to go back in time and say this was wrong and therefore 2 generations later is a problem when you yourself were a part of that same social norm. It was acceptable back then to do that. And I just don't think you should be judged on that. You should be judged on the merit of your character now, not what you were 3 generations ago.
Well, on top of all this, you have this movement, if you will, for people to try to find common ground with one another. That's what some of these CEOs and these companies, they're trying to find common ground and find a way forward, right? That's kind of the way they talk about it. The problem is you can't find common ground when one side is basing its argument on lies. The idea is that cops are hunting black people down and shooting them, which is what's commonly spouted by a lot of people. Like that there's this epidemic of cops killing black people, which just isn't true. It's not true in the slightest bit. And, the sad thing is this Micaiah that was shot, this teenage girl that was shot in Columbus, she's going to become another statistic where it's going to be black cop or white cop shoots black person, right? With no context to what that stat means. It was a justified killing. Yes, there was a black girl that died to a white cop, but she was trying to kill somebody else with a knife. It was a justified shooting. So
that cop's a hero, and that's a tragic event. Her parents lost a child. You know what I mean? Like, you can't. The community.
Well, she's foster, but the people. I don't know if it was her dad or her foster dad, but the guy that was there screaming, "You shot my baby! You shot my baby!" About 4 seconds before that was trying to stomp on the girl's head that she was trying to stab. Oh. You can see it on the police cam footage.
I didn't see that.
Grown-ass man kicking a teenage girl, trying to kick her in the back of the head as she's on the ground.
Up like this, as soon as the weapon gets drawn. I guess I didn't see that part.
It's a culture thing. As part of all of this problem, it's a culture thing. And trying to have common ground with people who base their entire thesis of the way things are going on a lie, you can't have common ground with that. There's no way to reach common ground and agreement with people that don't base what they're doing in truth. And that used to be a good enough argument, but that now you have this whole idea of objective truth. And, that's just racist too, because, you're using facts and actually reality. Well, that's racist. Well, I should be able to just believe whatever the hell I want to believe, whether it's true or not. It doesn't matter who it scares. It doesn't matter who it affects.
And the fact that you don't believe my warped vision makes you a racist or makes you a misogynist or a bigot. And that's the whole thing when you look at, going back to the whole long march to the institutions. But, I was listening to, I guess, what was it? Tucker Carlson brought up an interesting, we'll say correlation, not causation, because it's not been statistically verified yet. But between 2014 and 2019, a guy named Travis Campbell, he calculated for every 4,000 BLM protesters, a law enforcement officer related fatality fell by 15 to 20%. So this guy went around and he calculated how many protesters were in all these big cities where BLM went back and had protests since 2014. And he said every place they had protests, the cops didn't draw and have fatalities by 15 to 20%. So,
right.
There was a reduction.
There were a lot less people being shot by cops,
and because they were afraid to be called a racist,
they weren't policing.
Right. They weren't policing, and in the same time, he backs
his number. The problem with his number is that related fatalities fell by 15-20%. That includes justified shootings.
Right.
Places where cops are shooting people that are doing something bad or they're trying to murder somebody else.
You've essentially muzzled them and made them gun shy, for lack of a better term. Anyway, they said violent crime and homicides went up between 1,000 and 6,000 in every single city that happened to. So yeah, you've saved approximately 300, if you do the arithmetic, 15 to 20%, was a reduction in 300 fatalities that were police related. And you increased violent crime. Think about your mom, think about your daughter, think about your sister. Violent crime went up in those cities by 1,000 to 6,000 each. Instances apiece.
And think about the 300 lives that were saved. Are these 300 lives that are really worth saving? Are these the 300 lives of gangbangers,
right,
of people that are like Micaiah that were in the process of getting ready to stab somebody else?
Right.
That's just another statistic in another place now that's not discussed. And that's what they'll do with a lot of these numbers. They'll come up with some kind of bullshit non-correlative number that sounds good. If we have protesters, if we can get at least 4,000 protesters, we'll save 300 lives. But
right.
And that sounds great and dandy on the surface, but then when you look at what it actually means and the cost of that,
the cost of it, right? It's absurd, and that's the whole thing. You've got, and then couple that with the pandemic. You take somebody's purpose, and this is the whole thing. This is what socialism does. You take away their purpose, you take away their jobs, you stick them in a house, don't let them communicate. How many of you guys out there have ever talked to somebody who works by themselves, exclusively by themselves? 99% of the time, they're by themselves. They're usually an awkward social conversation. And that's because they work by themselves all day. They don't have a community to bounce back and forth and go, no, you're wrong on this, or hey, you're right on that. And to be able to bounce back good ideas or differing points of view. And socialism is actively taking that. Look at the teacher, Mr. Ozzie. He spoke out. He got canceled. He got taken. He's no longer allowed to teach. This is what this guy's profession is. That's what his passion is. He's no longer allowed to do that. So it's like instance after instance like that, keeps occurring. So if you don't think there's a revolution happening right now, we need to wake up and take a look at it, because it is active and it is happening around you.
The idea that, Biden was going to be this moderate president as they sold him at is obviously going out the window very rapidly. There's lots of things on the non-social justice side as far as raising, the capital gains tax and gun laws and other stuff. But they're very rapid. One of the first things Biden did when he got into the presidency was remove Trump's presidential order that removed
critical race
theory from being taught in any government institution. So now you can go back to teaching critical race theory and teaching things like, what the UN ambassador said, which you want to talk about burning my ass, is when the representative to the UN, the United States, goes in front of, places like China and Russia and Iran, the new leaders of the Human Rights Council.
Yeah, China and Iran are in charge of the Women's Rights Commission for the UN. Are you kidding?
The idea that she's going to go in front of there and say that our founding documents were woven with white supremacy, this is what is going to be taught to the next generation. And it doesn't matter if it's true or not, because that's all they're going to hear, and that's all that they're going to accept. And they're going to think that, which means that anything based off of our founding documents isn't worth keeping. And this is how things like the Bill of Rights vanish. This is how you have speech that is no longer allowed. This is how you have your right to protect yourself is no longer a right. You're supposed to take the bullet. You're not supposed to hurt anybody else. You're just supposed to let them hurt you. Let them steal your shit.
Right. It's only fair. Yeah, she goes on a national stage. Could you imagine that 30 years ago, 10 years ago? Could you imagine that? Somebody going to the UN and saying, because the institution of slavery once existed in the United States, racism has been woven into our entire founding documents, our founding documentation, like all of it.
Well, and it's not based on fact. It's an agenda, and most of it is our Marxists that have been on this long game since the 1940s, 50s, of infiltrating every institution in the United States and pushing us ever so gradually towards communism. And when they realized the universities weren't enough, that's when they started going after the little kids. And that's what you're seeing now. You're seeing little kids being taught that because you're white, you're evil. And it happens in the progressive states, if you will, now, places like California, New York, and apparently Virginia is progressive. But you're having all of this stuff based on race. And that's it. There's no other reason to do it other than because race. And they want equity, not equality. They want to hold the white kid back to make it so that supposedly the minorities can keep up. But that's not what happens. All you do is degrade the entire system as a whole. Okay. It's the opposite of a rising tide lifts all boats. They're draining all the water out of the bathtub, so everybody's sitting on the fucking bottom.
Right. Could you imagine if you applied that to like the NBA?
Well, you'll know it doesn't fit the narrative, so it'll
I'm
never
just
be
saying.
applied.
I'm just saying, no. But if you like didn't allow LeBron to jump as high as everybody else, to consider the Caucasians on the team, or field and track, you had to like slow them up a little, or put weights on, the fastest swimmer,
or make them start 10 seconds slower.
Right? Could you imagine like to apply this to a sports thing? Could you imagine that? Or in the NFL, you give somebody, I don't know, who's the fastest running back now, or the fastest, whoever. Give him like a parachute to pull around the field, just to slow him down so everybody else can keep up. No, you wouldn't put butts in the seats. It wouldn't work. But you're doing that on a collegiate level, and it's okay. It's bullshit. But anyway, it's not all bad, though. I mean, some cool things happened this week, to end on a high note here. Was it the Ingenuity Mars helicopter made its first flight on Mars?
So there's a new probe they launched to Mars. They got there about a month ago. It was just like Perseverance, but it's this process of flying through space from Earth to Mars, crashing into essentially controlled crashing into the atmosphere. Once it gets into the atmosphere, this rocket ship sky crane detaches, slowly descends. I don't want to say slowly. It rapidly controlled descent towards the surface. And when it gets close to the ground, this rocket sky crane lights off, flies, and then gets close to the ground and lowers this Volkswagen size drone, our vehicle drivey wheelie fucking science experiment with a radioactive power source to the ground, and then flies away and crashes. And on this thing, the Perseverance was a helicopter, a little remote control. I say remote control, but it flies itself. Nobody on Earth was flying it. Was on board, and it was to test powered flight on another planet.
And we actually did it. The United States, this evil country with racist documents, flew an RC helicopter on the planet Mars. That is so huge. It had a 39.1 second flight from 173 million miles away from Earth. That is so cool. I will post a video here, a link to the video, because you see this whole thing pick up, and then the rover's videotaping the whole thing. It lifts up, kind of pulls into a hover, comes right back down. And they're like, all right, they want to fly this thing to the top of this mountain. I guess it's got a sustained, its batteries are big, and it's got solar power.
It's got its own solar power, so it can fly for, I forget what it is. It's not very long. It can only fly for like a minute or a minute and a half.
But they want to get it on top of this crater to look.
But it can charge its own batteries with solar power, and on board this thing is actually a small piece of the Wright brothers aircraft, the cloth from the wings of the Wright brothers aircraft. They put it on this thing. It's kind of, a symbolism of the first flight kind of deal, which is super cool. And
117 years later, we've gone from a 10-second flight on a beach to hovering a helicopter on another planet.
And this is, this kind of rounding all this together. It's kind of an epitome in my mind of this idea of how good life in the United States really is, and how the problems that we are facing are truly inconsequential in the big picture, especially compared to what's going on in the rest of the world. Because right now, a large portion of the population is concerned about a problem that doesn't exist. White supremacy isn't a real problem in the United States. I'm not saying it doesn't exist. What I'm saying is it's not something that's going to destroy the country. What's going to destroy the country is, Marxism and this BLM movement that makes everything based on race, whether it is or it isn't, in a negative aspect. And instead of people coming together and focusing and getting things done like they did with the Perseverance, the rover on Mars.
No, they're too busy making everybody equal.
People are too busy looking for excuses to be unhappy and to think that the world's bad. And this is that eternal saying of strong men make good times, times make weak men. weak men make hard times, and the cycle continues.
Right.
And unfortunately, I think that's where we're at right now, is we're in a state where there's a lot of really weak people setting us up for some very difficult times to come our way.
Well, if you don't think there's a difference between everybody coming together as one and not caring about what language the other person speaks or what they look like, you need not look any further than China's attempt at putting rovers on planet Mars. I think their first one lasted about 10 seconds and then it crapped out. The second one, or Mars, what they call China Mars 3, lasted 104.5 seconds. Ours are outlasting their lifetime by months.
3 and 4 fold what they were designed to live.
Right. And the only reason they became inactive is because one of them got stuck. Like, it was still fully functional. It got stuck in the sand, So, I mean, like, you really look at this, opportunity lasted 15 years. So if you don't think that in the United States, we put you put the monkey in the tree and put the fish in the pond kind of thing, you play to your strengths. If you don't think that has an impact, and you don't need to look further than communist China to see the difference, where everybody there is a C student. I'm not saying they're all C students, but everybody there is treated equally across the board like that. You lose your A students, you lose your physicists, you lose the guys who could have figured out, how to make the damn Mars rover last 15 years instead of 15 seconds. So anyway, I digress. America rocks. I think we could probably end it right about there.
Yeah, I think that's it. We've beat on the social justice kind of crap a little bit here and talked about all the challenges and the stuff that's coming. Yeah. And you can't just ignore it, because if you ignore it, they're going to come for you next. And all you got to do is be that teacher that says, hey, I don't think it's fair that we're telling children that they're awful because they're white. And because you say something like that is totally normal and inconsequential, now you don't have a job.
Yep. And guys, we'll put the video. Well, it's an audio file. We'll link the audio file or play it in here. We'll splice it in, because it is damning what the director says. He's not joking, and I honestly don't think he really wanted it in his institution, but he didn't know how to fight it and didn't know how to get away from it. But anyway, guys, if you guys like what we're doing, like and subscribe. We've got a Facebook page, so go over there, like and subscribe us on that. Like and comment, because we'd like to hear from you guys. We'd like to hear what we're doing right, what we're doing wrong. So please like and subscribe. And as always, till next time, good night. Semper Fi.
Have a good night.